Nephi, welcome. Ganohalidoh for being here today. I'm going to just read a short bio so that our audience gets to know you a little bit better, and then I'll have you introduce yourself to the audience. So Chef Nephi Craig is a citizen of the White Mountain Apache and is also Diné or Navajo. He's also the founder of the Native American Culinary Association, or NACA, an organization that is dedicated to the research, refinement, and development of Native American cuisine. Nephi was featured in the film Gather 2020. You may have seen that on Netflix, which is a documentary on Indigenous food sovereignty. Nephi is also a leader in the field of restorative Indigenous food practices, a term which is critical for social recovery and Indigenous resurgence during the age of fast food and disease. Chef Craig is an advanced certified relapse prevention specialist and behavioral health technician, currently serving as the Nutritional Recovery Program Coordinator at the Rainbow Treatment Center and Executive Chef at Café Gozhóó at the White Mountain Apache Tribe in Arizona. Welcome, Nephi, and Ganohalidoh for being here.
My name is Nephi Craig. I'm White Mountain Apache and Navajo. I'm coming to you from White River, Arizona, on the White Mountain Apache Tribe. I'm located about 3.5 hours northeast of Phoenix, Arizona. We are up in the White Mountains where we have all 4 seasons. So I've been cooking professionally 26 years, and the way I arrived at the work that I do and my perspective and paradigm on food and health has all kind of been through a guided journey. I feel like following food and being inquisitive and asking questions, connecting the dots and then taking action quickly has kind of been what I've done, whether I knew the depth of the work I was going to get into or not. I really learned a lot by following Indigenous foods and following Indigenous cultivars. So I'm very happy to be here today. I'm a father of 3 young Indigenous people. My oldest is 20 years old. He's out doing his thing, living in Flagstaff, Arizona. And my 2 little ones are 7 years old. My daughter is 7 years old, and my youngest son is 6 years old. So I've got a pretty heavy workload, and I'm a parent and a practitioner in this field. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Just to start off with a question, we have Indigenous nations all across Turtle Island that have extensive trade networks. And I'm thinking of even the food and the way the food cultivars and even food styles have traveled. Treaties, diplomacies, activism across state borders and travel to other Indigenous nations. What does Indigenous internationalism look like for you when you think about that term or the ways that we enact our diplomacies across our nations?
What Indigenous internationalism means to me and what it sounds like to me is it's a very pressing concept. I think from my knowledge in the field, working with food and traveling around the world and being able to be a student of the practice or of foods, I've been able to see colonialism in its I always say it's a shapeshifter, and its shapeshifting form around the world. When I first got into the work in the late 1990s and into the 2000s, I was very unaware of terms like decolonization, indigeneity. Many of the terms we use today to articulate our Indigenous struggle, at least to my knowledge, were not present or available to me, or I was unaware of them. So over the past 26 years, we've seen more Native and Indigenous professionals enter various realms of academia, medicine, law, governance, foodways, and expand the need for international articulation. And we're recognizing the importance that we are all up against and fighting back against colonialism. as a monster, as an equal opportunity destroyer. So from Australia to Alaska to Argentina to Mexico, even right out here in Apache land, the commonalities of how destructive the forces of colonization have been must be articulated and strengthened by unifying our voices across the globe, because colonialism and the violence of colonization is a global phenomenon. And I feel like as we continue to combine our experiences, we have a shared history of trauma and violence, but we also have a shared future of resiliency and construction. So I feel like being able to combine on an international level our experiences and leverage terms like traditional ecological knowledge, leverage terms like historical trauma, and leverage our indigenous paradigms and epistemologies to better gain access to resources that we need for health. Those are all things that come to mind when we group our voices together, and that's what I think of when I hear Indigenous internationalism.
Beautiful. I love that idea of shared resilience. That's such a powerful concept. I'm going to kind of go off script a little bit and say, what does decolonization look like for you? And it's a term that a lot of people hear, but they don't necessarily know what that means on the ground. And you could think of in some ways stripping away those colonial impositions on our lands and our waters. But what does that decolonization process look like for you, especially with food systems, or regenerating our foods, our traditional foods?
What decolonization looks like in my life, in my personal life, and how it informs my work is, to me, it's like addiction and recovery. The trauma and violence of addiction, and then the power and self-determination of recovery. I know decolonization has many aggressive branches and violent clashes with power structures. Decolonization has necessary arms of resistance and force. And so, like, the way that I view it, as I've come to understand it, the word decolonization came to me in a sense through studying the foods. I wasn't able to be in a Native American studies class or an Indigenous class in a university. It was very much just by following foods. I think ingredients like quinoa, ingredients like chocolate, ingredients like corn, beans, and squash helped guide me to understand decolonization, reclamation, and revitalization. So in the ways in my life that I've done my best to heal from this post-colonial encounter with violence is identifying where I've embodied it myself, what elements of my life of colonization, from the patriarchy to value systems of power, property, prestige, to themes that are themes of masculinity that don't necessarily match with Navajo and Apache views, and challenging those things within me. So it's it's been a long process, and I feel like I may have heard decolonization before 2010, which is when I personally got clean. But it really didn't begin to set in until like 2011 for me. And so in that case, in that example, I'm like 13 years into it, into understanding, embodying it, and finding ways um to 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 strike back. I feel like decolonization is both, it is both based in conflict, and it's also based in peace. It's also based in action. And so without trying to get too lofty or too, without over romanticizing it, it's a very difficult process. And I always feel like we're walking a really thin line of how we implement tools and systems. I feel like whenever people ask this question, I ask them to kind of look at their own cultural intuition and look at the value systems of their individual homelands or families or tribes. Um, but for me, it's very much a process of subtraction and addition, being able to remove certain items from behaviors from my life and learning how to replace them with more productive ones has been an ongoing struggle for me. So that's what I think of, and that's what I feel like decolonization is for me. I feel like in 2011 or 2010 is when I encountered the threshold, right? I look at decolonization like life 101. It's like the doorway, because you can stay enchanted at the doorway, peeking in, flying a banner, being fist in the air at the doorway, but do you have the courage and stamina to walk through that doorway and live a life of resurgence and decoloniality? So that's kind of what it means to me. I feel like it's a threshold term, and there's much more on the other side beyond that in terms of construction and reconstruction.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'm glad you said too that there's no real romantic approach to this. Like this is an on the ground lived experience. It's often uncomfortable, it's challenging, it's a day-to-day process that is going to look different for everyone. So getting to you, what started you on your journey back in 2010, 2011 to really think about traditional foods and kind of the role foods played in your life?
Uh, Ever since I got into a cooking school when I was 18 years old, it was apparent right away that we were being force fed a French curriculum. My life on the White Mountain Apache tribe and the Navajo Nation, I had grown up seeing food being very integral to our identity. Food is in our creation stories, food is in our ceremonies, food is in our songs. In a real basic way, I knew that like food is our relatives in our clan system. When I got into school, that's where it was very apparent that there was no information, encountering the racist stereotypes and these assumptions that frybread represented us all, or that was the pinnacle of indigenous gastronomical achievement. And so to me, I knew that was very, very wrong. And so that was kind of the seed and the idea that set me on my path to eventually do something with native foods. I didn't know when I was 18 that foods would take me down this path, but the more I uncovered, the more truth that became apparent. I just really felt like the whole world needed to know. My early life and perspective were definitely influenced by drugs and alcohol and wanting to be like a fine dining chef. I really very much focused on and studied the classical French style of cooking, because I felt like it was an art form that would take me far away or travel. So those were my early aspirations, but the deeper I got into it and reaching a very high caliber French restaurant at 21 or 22, it became very apparent, and the sense of urgency even went up more that the hero chefs I was looking at and was aspiring to be like had no clue of the depth of the information that I needed. Technically, they had skills and stuff that were useful to me as a chef, but even by like 22 or 23, I felt deep in my gut or my heart that I wanted whatever food I was going to create to be accepted and identifiable by, like, say, my mom or my grandma or community members back home on the res. And spiritually, being in a fine dining kitchen wasn't providing that. It was providing a kind of a different personal professional type of spiritual nourishment that validated my skills as a young chef, but there was something lacking. And so after that place, that's when I decided to start NACA and try to find others like me, just because like I feel like in the spirit of ceremony, when we gather and we come together and we believe in a common cause and we have a shared experience, there's a lot of power in that. So the early isolation of being a 18, 19, 20-year-old practitioner in the field of fine dining um, was very, very isolating. So fast forward down the line, foods would take me to Germany and Brazil and Japan, to London, and all these places, seeing the international intrigue on Native American culture. And somewhere along the line, I think it was some hip hop from like 2004. This native hip hop group called Antithesis. They have some really deep and meaningful, profound lyrics around decolonization, and it really kind of showed or illustrated that I was on the wrong path or possibly on the wrong path, that me trying to quote unquote educate the world was unnecessary, that the colonial world and the colonial paradigm had already demonstrated that it doesn't want us as people. It wants our technology, it wants our sophistication, it wants our intelligence, but not us. So the paradigm over time shifted and became more about circulating the skills and information at home. And so that's kind of what I do now today. And it's been this journey to be able to do that. So it's in a sense really been learning by experience for me, and it's really kind of so today, being here at home on the White Mountain Apache tribe, I've been after all that international travel and work, I've been working and cooking on the White Mountain Apache tribe for almost the past 15 years now, and it's where I've been developing my cooking style as a native chef. Very much with the opportunity to travel, but I feel like there is much more need beyond fine dining. And when you mentioned the front lines, I feel like our front lines are very unique, but not so unique that we're special, but they're unique to our experience here on the White Mountain Apache tribe. And we can talk more about that if the following questions.
For sure. Yeah, thank you for that. And you mentioned fry bread, and so I'm gonna jump in. We might get in trouble for this, but uh, I think you had a really nice way of talking about fry bread as kind of being that inappropriate uncle that comes to parties and says inappropriate things. Uh, but could you expand on that a little bit in terms of, out here it's called bannock, and
Yeah,
we know that it's served a great purpose in terms of survival,
yeah,
especially during times of need. But there's also ways to rethink it. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that
yeah. We
without us getting into too much hot water.
well, it's it's almost impossible because frybread is such a debatable and controversial topic. I think I always joke around and say at the dinner table or like at Christmas, you don't talk about religion, politics, or frybread because
It's true.
it'll it'll cause a steamed debate. But I think
Yeah.
the facts and the history of frybread, presenting the facts and the history of frybread or bannock, is the way to kind of provide the food education that will allow people to make informed decisions. When it comes to nutrition for mental health disorders and recovery, and especially for our populations, it's never a good thing to just take people's food away from them. There's a lot of shaming culture and shaming themes in nutrition and food culture that we don't need any more of that. There is so much necessity that many of our people still rely on it as a food staple. But it can't be denied that the history of fry bread has this really a legacy of brutality and colonization directly linked to it. And so the reason that chefs and everyday average Joe people will point to bannock or fry bread, that's it's because it was so widespread. Us having to adopt it as a food source was definitely based out of survival. fortunately, our grandmothers and our matriarchs and our families were innovative and creative and humble, and we were very versatile with it. But it very much was a food choice that was forced on us through physical violence. It has a very traumatic past. So by discussing it and sharing it and talking about the history and the legacy, I feel like that's one positive way, or a way to be able to allow people to practice harm reduction, practice moderation. If they want to go abstinence, it's all up to them. It's one of those ingredients, one of many native foods that hold that kind of story and history and legacy.
Absolutely. Yeah. What for that. A nice way to delicately approach that difficult topic.
Yeah.
Who are some of the biggest influences on you in terms of motivating you to do the work that you do? Who are the people that you look up to, whether it's your relatives or whether it's people outside of your community or inside your community?
Wow, that I'm going to leave a bunch of names out, but
Sure. Yeah.
gosh, I, I used to have a whole bunch of white chefs names that I would say great American chefs that do French cuisine, and I could name a whole bunch of Frenchies or Americans, but that's been a part of I guess my journey as an Apache chef, to kind of understand that I don't need that Western or classical validation anymore. When I was very younger, I would try to appeal and mimic those styles of power, and there was somewhere along the way that I realized that the powerless mimic the powerful, and I felt like that's something that I was doing in fine dining. So now today, I feel like there's been some of the names that I mentioned I never had the ability to meet. Some of them I have, but one of my early influence is Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart for coining the term historical trauma. I feel very I've never had the opportunity to meet her, but knowing what general basic information I do is that the term historical trauma was leveraged and articulated by her and she's one of the early characters that was really recognized for that. And it's like that term as a tool is like less than 50 years old. So knowing that she had the courage and the ability to do that and fight her way into this mental health paradigm, or this paradigm of social work, and set the stage for practitioners like us, is very inspiring to me. So she's one of those characters. Michael Yellowbird for his work in like neuro decolonization and just totally geeking out on the brain and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're a big influence in my life for the work that you do at UVic. Mr. Taige Alfred is a big influence on his books like Peace, Power, and Righteousness, Yellowbirds, and their collective book on for for Indigenous eyes only.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. For place-based in my region, the late anthropologist Keith Basso has put together a lot of great books and pieces on our region, specifically my tribe. And so there's a guy that I want to be able to meet. Maybe he'll hear this someday. He's a clinical psychologist, Mr. Dr. Joe Gahn. He's been another that I've only seen lectures online, clinical psychologist, and he talks a lot about trauma, grief, recovery, and Western modalities and indigenous paradigms. Really fascinating stuff. But other chefs too, other cooks and chefs and practitioners in the field. I wish I could write all these down. There's so many out there, but like for contemporary context for the work that I do, those are some of the names that come to mind. My friend Chris Rodriguez out in LA, Claudia Serrato in LA. The list goes on and on and on of people that have really helped mold and introduce me to concepts like decolonization.
Yeah. What for that? Yeah, I think there's always going to be people we leave out, right? That it'll come to you probably
Yeah.
later. But yeah, appreciate that. Uh,
I'm feeling
you're
the heat,
feeling the
naming names.
heat.
I'm like,
I
oh
know,
shit.
naming names. There are going to be people after you say, "Why didn't you name me?" Uh, I liked earlier you talked about, food is really a spiritual practice.
Yeah,
And I think in some ways the term food sovereignty doesn't really encompass that. But
yeah.
can you talk a little bit about, what food sovereignty means to you, especially that spiritual side that's often missing from that conversation?
Oh my gosh, like food, the best way I can put it into words without sounding hokey or corny or mystical or whatever. Um, to me, the way I view food, like say planting a seed or tending a garden or harvesting foods out in the field, it's like that, just that simple behavior. You're right at the nexus or right at the axis of all life, the cosmos, creation, climate, emotionality, tradition. When you think of like planting corn, and us Navajos and Apaches, we have planting songs and we have ceremonies devoted to this. Um, there's four different colors of corn that if you have one kernel of each one of these colors of corn, say black, blue, yellow, and white corn, you can tell our Apache creation story. You can articulate a whole Navajo way of looking at life and planning. So food is a very place-based entryway into indigenousness. I feel like even though I can't speak Apache or Navajo, I feel like when I'm cooking food or harvesting food or just involved in any of the foodways, I feel like I'm speaking Apache or speaking Navajo through my behaviors. And I feel like that the behavioral component, like in a clinical environment, we would say that it's behaviorally activating indigenousness. You're like turning on a switch through behaviors, and I feel like the foods offer this opportunity. So in the work that we do, we just try to allow people to work with foods, and hopefully the behaviors and the group dynamics will have the light bulbs go off. So food sovereignty is really having the ability to again follow cultural intuition, connect the dots, and take action. So the way we've done that at the cafe is by focusing on the group dynamics of the behavioral health group dynamics of a culinary team, the interaction and preparation of indigenous cultivars, and talking about indigenous food and food history and themes of health and recovery. Um, and this all does include those very dark realms of violence, trauma, but also being very solution based. So when you kind of combine all of those experiences around food, it cannot be not spiritual. You know what I mean? It just
Yeah,
takes you to that deeper place. Even just having a class or a discussion about food memories is a spiritual practice. And it's fun. It's fun. It's engaging.
absolutely. Yeah, Enrique Salmon talks about even recipes as forms of stories, right?
Yeah.
Storytelling, that are passed on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you talked about your three kids that you've got, and
Yeah.
even the team that you've got at the cafe.
Mm-hmm.
How are you sharing this knowledge that you've had and that you continue to practice with future generations, especially around regeneration of food systems? What does it look like for you to share that and to kind of teach in some ways future generations?
Oh man, it's talk about multiple front lines that are hard to hold. You know what I mean? It's on the home front with me and my kids, it's just cooking from scratch as much as possible.
Yeah.
Doing our best, doing my best as a parent to make better purchasing choices, like eliminating seed oils or eliminating sweeteners, getting canola oil out, trying to find, choices that for the long term will benefit them. but also just having fun and storytelling with my kids when we're eating and cooking together. It's not like we eat and cook. I mean, we don't cook together every single day, but sometimes they're always there when I'm cooking. Um, my older son, he's 20 years old, and he's been tuned into a lot of these themes. He's come with me and he's traveled and he's done some of these workshops. He's participated in ceremony, and in his own way, he kind of embodies and takes to heart some of these themes by being active and eating right and working out. And his channel is through music. So, and then on the clinical front, the need on the White Mountain Apache tribe in my own community is extremely high. The health disparities around preventable food-related diseases is just through the roof, like any other marginalized group or an indigenous community. And it's difficult to pick our battles because they come at us on all fronts. So I feel like depending on any given day or any given service, we have the opportunity to do these, to share this food information with clients that are in recovery. We reinforce it and talk about them in while we're cooking. Say if we're going to run a special, like a special with like three sisters that has corned beans and squash, as we're describing it to our cooks or chefs, we'll quickly run through the indigenous history of it, focusing in on Mesoamerica and how food traditions have made their way to Apache land. Then on a wider scale, we do our best to train our own teams. And then like just a couple of days ago, we're on our Apache radio station. But more recently, since this closure, we've been doing in-service trainings for our staff that have kind of a slant on professional development and mental health, but that's really centered on foodways that kind of takes us through history of food choices, and then all the way into the contemporary setting. Because us as a cafe, we're open to the public, and as a cafe or hospitality environment, the first assumption is that we're just a business that's open to the public, and that's true. But we're taking it beyond that because of all these spiritual components, these themes of resurgence, this very interdisciplinary work that we do. We at our own at our own will, we take it beyond that and are looking at customer service as clinical care or client care. So that's kind of how we approach it, and it's pretty amazing. It's definitely the work that needs to continue. I feel like we're barely scratching the surface, and the need is very high. The need is very high.
Sounds like it. Yeah, it'd be wonderful to visit sometime and just see some of the
Yeah.
work that you're doing. So you've talked a lot about different front lines. What front line is kind of the most prominent for you right now in terms of challenges? Thinking of those day-to-day challenges that you face and confront when trying to do this important work.
Oh my gosh. I guess on a personal side, the front line for me is my own food choices and diet. Like last week, I turned 44, and so I went in for a checkup, an annual checkup. I hadn't gone in years, so I decided I didn't want to wait until I was sick to go. I decided to practice self-care and go in, and it just so happened that the follow-up to get the lab results from all the tests, the blood, the X-rays, all that stuff, it fell on my birthday, and so on my birthday, I got a good bill of health. I know where I stand with my blood sugar levels, my cholesterol levels, and I feel like I have a good, even though I drank and used drugs and smoked for a number of years in my life, I'm still okay. That gave me a lot of optimism, and so it also kind of helped me to form a pathway forward to integrate even more indigenous foods into my diet and change and carry that message, because I really always feel like if I'm not living it, I shouldn't really get too hardcore in talking about it. So that's the first front. The first front line for me is my personal health, so I can be around for my kids and I can continue this work. The second front line is the front line, the battle against addiction. To me, which is also the battle against intergenerational trauma
Yeah.
and destigmatizing addiction work. I've noticed that in the food and wine world, right, the restaurant world, it's a topic that very few want to talk about. Very few European chefs want to discuss, toxic kitchens and workplace and the addiction rates of staff. But it's a very real thing across the industry. But here in Apache land, I feel like historical trauma is a root cause for so many of these health disparities. And historical trauma has direct, strong roots to food choices, food vocabulary, food outcomes, and health disparities. So addressing the addiction is healing that really deep wound that a lot of us aren't even aware that's there. So to me, that's the really interesting work where I put a lot of my energy because it's really cool because we have to talk about the criminality, we have to talk about the violence, we have to talk about the oppressor, we have to talk about white supremacy, we have to talk about nutrition, we have to talk about grandma, love, family, community. And to me, that's why it's such gritty meat and bones work. I feel like because we've had groups and talked about food where hardcore, rough, tough, mean, intimidating Apache dudes, break down and cry when they talk about food memories.
Uh,
So it's a way to process trauma, and
yeah.
it's a very equalizing opportunity to use food. So those right now are my front lines. I like to integrate social media when I can and kind of reconnect or connect with Indigenous internationalism through social media. um, I rarely claim to be an expert, but rather a practitioner. I'm in the trenches, day to day. I deal with a population that is straight off the streets or coming out of jail or just with the early healing wounds of trauma in addiction work. So, but I love it. So those are two of my immediate front lines. And then the other one, which I shouldn't name last, but is really important, taking care of me so I can be a good dad. That's
Yes.
really important to me. Hmm.
Yes. Yeah. What well, for that? Yeah, and that's such an important part of who we are. I'm a father as well, and
Hmm.
those are challenging front lines, especially when you've got a 17-year-old daughter in the car with you, rolling her eyes, trying to engage her in some of this important work. So, thank you for that.
Hmm.
This is kind of a offhand question, but what are the what's a favorite dish or a favorite thing that you like to make with either for yourself or with your family?
It's not indigenous, but I love making Vietnamese broths. So I love making pho.
Yeah,
Um, I feel like it's like straight alchemy, like
yeah,
it's magic. I
yeah.
love doing that. I like teaching my kids how to use chocolate. We recently are, we're talking about and using chocolate for the holidays, and now they've passed. But I really like cooking outside when I can on a fire. Um, I love making noodles from scratch, whether they're Italian or Asiatic. I like doing that. And I like the season isn't really there yet, but I like harvesting wild foods when I can also.
Excellent. Yeah, probably coming
Hmm.
up on that season right about now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
excellent. Well, just a couple more questions. This one's a little bit larger in scope, but we'll see what we
Yeah.
can do with it. It's kind of a question that can encompass past, present, and future generations. What does life beyond the state look like for you? When you think about, an Apache perspective or a Navajo perspective, what does that look like for you? I think you've already
Oh my
expressed a lot
gosh.
of, I know it's a huge question. I may have to rethink this one. Uh, you've already talked a lot about ways that you've really embedded yourself in your culture and those practices. So maybe it's a question of how do you encourage others to go deeper into those practices so that they can confront some of those traumas that they've experienced, so they can confront some of those challenges that they have in life.
Sure. I think one simple attempt to answer that first part, like what is life beyond the state? I feel like life beyond the state for me in relation to right now today is doing enough work to put myself out of business as a clinician, as a drug and
Yes.
alcohol clinician. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Un Unfortunately, the nature of addiction is a human thing, so there's always going to be the work. Just like food is a human thing, there's always going to be the need. I feel like gosh, there was something that as you were saying that second part that was coming to mind. Shit, what was it? Can you repeat part of that second part again?
Oh, the second part was just, what are some things that you would say or do to encourage other people
Yeah.
to really
Okay, I
get
remember
involved
now.
in the work? Yeah.
I I use that to encourage people young and old and thinking of digital international sensationalism with social media. I like to use the term land back
Uh,
as a tool, as a very as an example that it's something that's reinforced. It's not a new idea for sure, for definitely. Land back is not a new idea, but it's been propelled in the past 10, 15 years by the youth. Um, you know, um, One reference point being Standing Rock before and after, and then it being heightened during the pandemic, and even given more energy and power after the murder of George Floyd. And coming out of the pandemic, land back. To me, as I look at that, I like to tell people that it is definitely frontlining action work that can be dangerous. The land back concept needs that arm of our action. But I also encourage people, professionals, and community members and decision makers to understand that land back is also access to care. We're not just demanding land back because we're pissed off. Yeah, we're pissed off, but on a much more human, resurgent level, access to land is access to care for us because our lifeways are interconnected, our health and our healing and our biopsychosocial concepts of identity are connected and informed by landscape. So the more access to land that we have as Indigenous peoples, the more opportunities we have to leverage traditional ecological knowledge, the more opportunities we have to implement interdisciplinary modalities like we've done here at Café Gozhóó. The more widespread this notion of landscape is destiny can take root. So I try to get people to look at these movements and concepts in a way that's relevant and also very creative, so that they can leverage it and use it in their daily lives. Like I was saying, like connect some dots and then take action.
Beautiful, beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and motivating, super motivating.
Mm-hmm.
Last question is there anything we didn't discuss that you'd like to talk about? And I know you've got a book, you've got, among other things, you've got lots on the go, but you've got a book that you're working on. Anything else that you want to discuss that we haven't talked about?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'd love to continue to talk and talk and talk. Yeah, I am working on a book. I feel like since I was a young chef and a younger cook and chef, people have always asked me to do a cookbook. I've always wanted to do a cookbook, but I feel like for me and my work and the way that I've come upon the education and experiences that I have, a cookbook would be, I don't, a cookbook would almost be too easy.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm writing a book so that to kind of introduce how I came upon the knowledge. And like I'm saying, and throughout this podcast is like, it's all been through experience. I feel like I came into the food world at a moment in time where there were no resources, where there were little practitioners, where it was very difficult to find other Native American chefs and indigenous chefs. It was, 20 years of having to create the recipes, 20 years of having to articulate the experience and survive it. Like had I relapsed and died, we would not be having this conversation. Had I, not seen the light after being locked up and all these things on the streets, this, I guess, without knowing the trauma and the loss and the hurt, I wouldn't be able to communicate the beauty and the power that's right there with waiting for us. So, I feel like I'm very lucky, and that book is going to attempt to do that. I feel like there's so much cultural protocol and so much cultural information that I want to do a little bit more work in terms of learning and understanding my ingredients before I actually put out a cookbook. I saw another native recipe that utilized ingredients that were very sacred to us as Apaches, but it was just kind of being thrown around and being treated differently, and that really kind of it stung a little bit
Uh,
to see, even though it
yeah,
was a different tribe, different region, different environment, they were kind of just, not to us, were disrespectful using an ingredient
yeah,
as a platform. You know what I mean?
right. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
um, but I do want to stress to the listeners that in the work that we do, always take care of yourself because it is very taxing. It's very difficult. It's heartbreaking work, and please don't be afraid of the tears. Processing the grief and the hurt that comes is an essential part of Indigenous resurgence. Processing and leveraging our own humanity for to continue our work is just as vital. Um, so those are some of the themes that kind of come about in the book that I'm working on, which I'm looking forward to letting out by the end of 2024. Scary as shit, but I'm gonna do it.
I'm excited. I'm excited to read it and excited for you. It
Yeah.
sounds wonderful. Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think what's if there's anything regarding our frontline work in a collective way, I think that it must continue, both the aggressive front, also the peaceful home front, the internal front. They're all very valid, and interconnecting the experiences and working with other people is so important. Like me sharing the message, I'm just talking about what's happening in Apache land, but it's relevant to all the listeners that may be global as they come across the message. So don't give up, keep fighting, keep being a antagonist, protagonist, all of those good things, because that's who we are.
Excellent. Well, on that note, Wado Nephi, thank you so much for taking this time today. And it's been a great conversation and a conversation that I hope we can continue uh, outside the podcast, even just to hear about the important work that you do.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And make sure that when we're in this work, we never lose our sense of humor, that we keep
Yes.
creating those really hardcore memes that strike back, and all the fun ways that we poke and strike at the oppressor, man. Keep your sense of humor, keep laughing, pushing forward.
Yes. Humor is vital, as I've found.
Hmm.
So,
Yep.
absolutely. Excellent. Thank you so much.
All
And we'll
right.
talk soon.
Yeah.
Okay. Wado.